but Apple pays their employees so well, and all of their iPads are made out of recycled whales. I actually started the event talking about the Vision Pro and its revolutionary impact on the world. We have lived through so many revolutions in technology that the word has completely lost its Bitcoin, its meaning. There's a lot of people with podcast microphones on the internet. I'm Charlie. I have a bioethics master's degree, and I wrote my thesis on the ethics of technology. So this is kind of my jam. Technological revolutions are supposed to like fix the world. They're overhyped every single year. Also, like, for what it's worth, I'm not hating on the iPad. It's a little thinner. It's got a faster processor. The screen's better. It's incremental upgrades. It's like by definition not a revolution. Depending on your age, you might have lived through a lot of these revolutions, each of which had a promise of like a future utopia. The personal computer, floppy disks and Oregon Trail, mobile phones. Then the internet went to the phones. Smartphones became enabled. Social media became enabled. Each of these things had their own promise of being able to like take power away from ruling classes and democratize whatever it was that was in process. Media, finance, Bitcoin, or Robinhood, the app, and all these different apps that are going to give us the revolution seemingly have not ever given us the revolution. Recent honorable mentions include, of course, social media, which was meant to democratize media and has led us to disinformation campaigns, the likes of which we have never seen before. The prevalence of social media has led to algorithmic radicalization in many different forms. Safia Noble talks about it in this book. We also have scads of evidence coming from the Mueller report. We also have scads of evidence coming from Cambridge Analytica's influence on Brexit, on the previous election. The technologies that are supposed to liberate us are often used against us way faster than they are used as tools of liberation. I don't recommend this book. I mentioned it in a previous video, and part of why I bring it up is because we have this tendency to believe that evolution leads in a natural direction, and that natural direction is towards like Elon Musk. And not because he's a really good person, but because he brands himself as a master of technology. Want to talk about a real revolution? That Copernican revolution, when we stripped a ton of power away from the church and gave a lot of power to science. Historically speaking, that was an important technological and scientific revolution. For a lot of people, Apple as a company has inherited the mantle of the church, or not like Apple specifically, but like the technologists, the wizards who are meant to save us from ourselves. But consistently, they don't. What they do is they find different ways to extract value from us via the technology they proclaim is our savior. Part of me does want to summarize chapter 2 of C.S. Lewis's book, The Abolition of Men, where he explains that when the technologists gain absolute power, freedom ends, which is a really good argument. I can break it down in more detail in another video. It deserves its own video. I forgot that I had set up this whole camera over here for shots of books. Anyway, where I would rather end is with actual revolutions. 2 specifically. 1 coming out of Federalist Paper number 10, and 2 coming out of Dr. King's speech, I think Beyond Vietnam. It might have also been Where Do We Go From Here? Let's read it and then we'll be done. Part of what Madison is on about in Federalist 10 is that in any democratic society, there will be interest groups that band together and create little pockets of tyranny within the world. The danger of domestic faction, he calls it. Though, as an aside, literally the title of the thing, Safeguard Against Domestic Faction and Insurrection, Madison saw it coming motherfucking hundreds of years ago. Awesome. Part of why the American Revolution was a revolution is because the idea was that it was important to stop tyranny. It was important to stop the tyranny of the majority over the minority. If there were minority groups that were being taken advantage of, it was a good thing for the government to prevent that from happening. Obviously, there were some holes in that argument. We didn't think of black people as people yet, and we didn't think of women as people either. The American experiment needs to be continually experimentificated. Let's get back. I'm sorry, I'm getting whimsical. I've been talking too late. Dr. King. It wasn't actually from Where Do We Go From Here? It's from Beyond Vietnam from 67. We covered that in a different video. They got hundreds of thousands of views and they got banned from TikTok. LOL. Okay, anyway, focus. I am convinced that if we are to get on the right side of the world revolution, we as a nation must undergo a radical revolution of values. We must rapidly begin the shift from a thing-oriented society to a person-oriented society. And here's the banger, the quote. When machines and computers, profit motives and property rights are considered more important than people, the giant triplets of racism, extreme materialism, and militarism are incapable of being conquered. So despite loving them, an iPad is not going to be the thing that leads us to a true revolution of values, nor social media, nor the internet, nor frickin' Bitcoin. So how do we fix it? Part of it is just imagination. I've learned from Dr. Benjamin, who learned from Octavia Butler, that part of the work of revolutions is simply the creative work of imagining better. That's a paraphrase from either her or her quoting someone else, definitely not my insight. Hi, it's me from the future. It was important to me to not steal other people's ideas and cite my sources when I can. I could not find a citation for that particular concept, but I realized it's not a sticky from Ruha Benjamin. I heard it in a speech that she gave.
The more steeped I am in the facts of inequity and injustice, the more I've come to appreciate the importance of imagination as a field of struggle.
What does that mean? King is right when he says that profit motives and property rights are indeed placed above people. In this world that we have created, companies have a fiduciary obligation to their shareholders. It is legally required of big companies like Apple to continually churn out money to other people at the expense of the world, their employees. Bezos is doing what the system is requiring of him. And I can hear your thumbs typing on your iPhone, but Apple pays their employees so well and all of their iPads are made out of recycled whales. Like, I get it, I understand, but the entire capitalist system, companies don't make $2 trillion without taking more from the world than they give to them. I gotta jump around a little to wrap this up. In Where Do We Go From Here? The next speech, he asks, why are there 40 million poor people in America? Back and beyond Vietnam, he says that a nation that continues year after year to spend more money on military defense than on programs of social uplift is approaching spiritual death. We can look to history to see that every technological revolution has been used against us. We are automating extraction. In a tax system that requires the accumulation of wealth for the sake of shareholders, we are automating the transition back to feudalism. In a social media environment where governments can buy influence in each other's elections and private companies can radicalize people for their own profit, we are, in a sense, in a kind of dangerous, real sense, automating insurrections. If I had time, I would read you the whole speech, but in the end of Where Do We Go From Here, one of Dr. King's last speeches, he explains that we have to balance the fact that life is individual and the fact that life is social. In a word, we have to look for a synthesis of capitalism and communism. That has a name now. It is called democratic socialism. Despite their flaws, Madison and the Founding Fathers saw that it was a real possibility that the system that they built might collapse. Dr. King asks, why are there 40 million poor people in America? One of the answers is that we have found ways to automate extraction, and we have not yet imagined ways to automate distribution. We must collectively find it within ourselves to imagine people as worth more than property, or we will approach spiritual and perhaps democratic, logistical, congressional, Supreme Court crisis-tastical democratic death. And as much as I want to end on a punchy one-liner for the sake of video retention, we do not actually have to start from scratch. Many people are already doing this work. It is not just a failure of our collective imagination that we don't think we can dream up ways of fixing it. It's a failure of our individual imaginations and our individual perceptions if we refuse to see that there are tons of good people doing tons of good work all around us. It is not as hopeless as it seems. Eratosthenes found a way to imagine that the world was not flat. Copernicus found a way to imagine that the world was not in the center of everything. Madison and Hamilton and the others found a way to imagine that kings did not need to rule everything. What is it our turn to imagine?
Remember, our laws and policies, our systems and structures are not timeless. They all began at some point. Some of these imaginings became codified, whether in laws or in city infrastructure or in software. And many of these high-tech fixes simply reinforce the oppressive status quo. If we're not careful, innovation will continue to breed new forms of containment.